All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Techniques and Tools to Check Your Bias in Search and Screen Processes. I'm Laurel Bellman, and I'm going to be moderating this session. And I am really excited about this topic. I recently served on a search and screen committee, and I'm really interested in digging into this topic and learning more about bias during this process. So now I'm going to go ahead and Jesse and Christian are going to introduce themselves, and then they're going to share their presentation. And then I'm going to read out any questions that you might have. So please go ahead and put any questions that you have for our presenters in the chat. And please note that I will be recording this presentation, and an accessible video will be available for viewing on the IT Professionals Conference website sometime next week. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jesse and Christian to introduce themselves and give their presentation. So take it away, Jesse and Christian.
Thanks, Laurel. Hi, everybody. My name is Christian Schmieder. I'm the Assistant Director for Data Governance at the Division of Extension. And together with Jesse Henderson, IT Portfolio Manager at the Division of Information Technology, we're going to give a presentation on how to use tools that are used in qualitative data analysis to check for unconscious bias in applications. So today we're going to first start with talking a little bit about our interest in the topic and how we got to this topic. We're going to briefly outline the UW guidelines and recommendations around bias and the hiring process to kind of give us a framework. Then we're going to make the connection between the tools and techniques that are used in qualitative research and how they can help with processes that are designed to manage bias. And then Jessie will give a demo in which she will show how she uses qualitative data analysis software for applicant material reviews to kind of bring all of this into practice. And then we'll have some time for questions. So I'm just going to start. My professional interest in the topic is that I'm a qualitative methodologist by trade. I did both my master's thesis and my PhD thesis on the topic of qualitative data analysis software use and qualitative methodology, especially how qualitative researchers learn the craft of doing analysis, especially when they are using tools like qualitative data analysis software. In my current role, I am involved in several hiring committees at different times. And the first time I was on a hiring committee, I found a lot of connections between the way in which we have to be conscientious about our decisions, careful about our decisions, reflective about our decisions in hiring processes. And the connection with that was really close to how qualitative researchers actually go about their work. And that's how I kind of got into this topic. And Jessie is going to go next and tell us a little bit about how she came to this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. This is Jessie. I'm the portfolio manager for user services within the Division of Information Technology. So my background is actually in the library world. So I have a degree in library and information science. And before I joined DoIT about a year ago, the bulk of my career was spent in the digital library production space. And, you know, I've had an interest in indexing and abstracting throughout my library career and metadata and description. And before I came to UW-Madison, I had a bit of a side gig doing indexing for academic publications. And I ended up using QDA software to index for books that way. So I had a pretty deep interaction with this type of software. And then when I came to UW-Madison, I started serving on search and screen committees or hiring committees. I've also chaired a few. So I had an opportunity to engage in that process quite a few times. And at one point, I kind of thought this feels very similar to some of the indexing almost that I'm doing, or where you're reading qualitative material and textual material and you're trying to pull out themes or match themes. And so I started using the software for my own review of application materials as I engaged in search and screens. So that's my background with this. I'm going to go ahead and jump in and discuss the connection of what we're talking about today with recommendations from HR. So Laurel, I think, is going to share a couple of links in chat. We wanted to tie what we're talking about today in general to what UW-Madison is talking about in terms of basically techniques that you would approach kind of keeping your unconscious bias in check. So we're going to highlight some of the points and recommendations from materials that are out there from UW-Madison HR. Some folks may be familiar with, there's a specific video and PDF that came out around 2016 called Hiring the Best and Brightest. So we're going to pull a few things out of there, but not go into too much detail about unconscious bias because there's many other resources for that. So we've probably seen the video. If you've served on a search and screen, you maybe had to watch it. There's a lot of information in there about how working in a committee and working together is one way to help combat bias not against, but like with each other. But there's also steps that individuals can take. So we were looking a bit at the supplementary PDF, which was also linked there as part of the resource recruitment toolkit. And it goes into a little bit more depth of what unconscious bias is and recommendations to mitigate it as best we can. So we think it's important to think about this bias as well during this solitary activity of the application review process, because you're alone. You're not as readily equipped maybe to look out for manifestations of bias as you are when you're kind of bouncing ideas off of one another. And if we don't check for bias here at this point, then we're susceptible to making decisions that aren't based on evidence that's in the application materials that we're reviewing. So just to highlight a few things specifically from the document and the video, it works to illuminate what bias is and ways that it can manifest. So it notes that bias shows up as automatic connections or decisions made without conscious consideration. So sometimes these automated processes are based on previous experience or stereotypes common in our society. So that can come in when we're reviewing application materials. It can arise for many reasons. It does arise. It can happen because of decision fatigue. It can happen because of cognitive overload. Often when we're serving on a search and screen or a hiring committee, this is in addition to your already the workload that you have. You could be on a committee that's reviewing 70 plus or 100 some applications. I know I've served on one where we had 110. So it's easy in this certain kind of time frame and with these workloads to let certain types of bias take over. So I just want to note that also it's stated in the PDF that unconscious bias is a natural aspect of how our brains work. So it's always happening. But when decisions need to be made with care, it can lead to poor choices that negatively affect our hiring decisions. So we wanted to highlight a couple of types of bias that show up in this document as well, that might show up in this solitary portion of reviewing application materials, one being anchoring bias. So let's say you're loving what you see at the beginning of a cover letter or resume, and then you're maybe kind of glossing over the other parts. You're under that time pressure and you're kind of, checking a few things off and you're seeing what you want to see at the beginning. Another being confirmation bias. You're maybe making assumptions about data based on what you believe a specific experience brings to the table. So are you, as you're reading through something and you're maybe not taking the right steps to document, are you assuming that there are things that are showing up there that aren't explicitly stated? And that can be a way of confirmation bias manifesting. So the solutions that are recommended in this PDF, so again, recommended from UW-Madison HR, is really focused on process and time. So a few things that are directly mentioned in their map to tools and techniques from the field of qualitative research and methodology. Oh, I see it's raining, thank goodness. And the document itself refers to an acronym SEEDS, S-E-E-D-S, which is utilized as a model of modeling instinctual behavior as a way to identify bias and take action against it. So we wanted to highlight the two E's from that acronym here. The first one being expedience. Are we moving through this too quickly and with not enough care? So the recommended action is to break the process into steps and create process to consider all the information. Additionally, experiences. Are we engaging in enough reflection around our process? Assuming that like our initial perceptions are accurate. So a recommendation there is to record your decisions and revisit after a break. So fundamentally, the recommended solutions individuals can take are couched in process and time, as I previously mentioned. It feels like it might be hard to carve out extra time to learn a new tool to tack on top of this. But personally, I feel like once I've learned QDA software, and then integrated into this process, I felt like it saved me time because there was a process for me to follow in going through the number of application materials, whether it's 6 or 60. I think it's a helpful approach to take. So what we're showing you today, and our focus is to demonstrate ways that you can make your bias and decisions explicit to yourself as you evaluate search and screen materials, and you can carry out the recommended steps by HR, which some of them are highlighted here in bold, some direct quotes from the PDF there, devoting time and energy, focus, stopping periodically to evaluate. So Christian's going to talk next about some of those same tenets because they show up and are foundational to the whole field of qualitative research and qualitative data analysis.
Yeah, so university guidance supports us by telling us what to do, devote time, and process. But what is process? How do I do this process thing when I have to challenge or be conscious about my bias? So before we jump into the qualitative research connection, we want to quickly break this down. So this process should include that you reflect on your decisions. You're not making just decisions based on your gut, but you're making decisions that are consistent, that you can reflect about and be like, I made the same decision similarly in at different times. That means also you need to question your decisions. You can't just assume you made a decision and it's the correct decision because you made it, because bias is always there. It can't be avoided. It's actually a feature, not a bug, but it becomes a problem if we let basically the elephant drive the cart without putting some guardrails on it. So you need to reflect your decisions, you need to question your decisions, and you need to make explicit why you made certain decisions. Well, for yourself, but also for others, because you're oftentimes working in a team. So you need to explain to folks why you saw something in a certain application and you saw the same thing not in the other application. And you need to ground that in the application itself and say, I saw this here and I saw that here and I didn't see that here, rather than, well, I had the feeling that this application had this and this one not, because then we're letting our bias take over and not our reflection. So with that, process is more complicated than just, let's reflect, question, make explicit. It's kind of like in the Great British Baking Show, which is a baking show where hobby bakers compete against each other, where they have to do a technical challenge. They're basically given a very reduced recipe. So it says, for example, make a pie crust. Okay, how do you make a pie crust? Well, it's clear you have to make a pie crust in order to make a pie, but how do you actually make it? So there's techniques and strategies from other areas of human activity where these kind of processes are more explicit and more broken down. And one of those is qualitative analysis and qualitative research. So we just go to the next slide, please. So qualitative research deals with the interpretation of non-numeric information, interview texts, documents, videos, audio, anything that has to do with language and speech and written speech. It's a research tradition that acknowledges the subjectivity of the researcher, and that's kind of in contrast to quantitative statistical methods in social sciences. Rather than trying to pretend that you can take the researcher and the researcher's subjectivity and take it out of the process to create a neutral process, qualitative research acknowledges that you can maybe pretend to take bias out of a process, but by pretending that you're not biased, you're probably still biased. So you have to work with the bias and you have to make implicit decisions explicit. And that's what makes them scientific, because explicit decisions can be criticized. And if they can be criticized, that makes them open to discourse. And that's actually very, very close, very, very similar in our hiring processes, where we need to make our decisions explicit to ourselves and others in order to come to a non-subjective and rather an intersubjective decision. So the bullet points that you see here on the screen are actually from this document from UW-Madison. So bias is universal. That's the same idea behind qualitative research. We cannot not work with the researcher as a subject. It's very difficult to manage in the moment of decision. That's why you need to slow down, have process, have documentation. Managing bias is also a craft. It's not just something that just happens. It needs to be couched in process, in routines, and in techniques. And it is also most successful when we're not doing this alone, which makes it even more important to document and to be explicit for our work in teams. So qualitative researchers have built tools that help them with these kinds of tasks. And one key tool for that is qualitative data analysis software, or QDAS. Qualitative data analysis software is basically a workbench that allows you to organize your data and the decisions that you have made and the reflections that you have made. Maybe you can forward one more for the bullet points. Thank you. You can annotate your data and you can document your decisions, whether that's your reflections on an entire document, let's say an entire application, or if it's a decision where you're like, I'm going to highlight this piece because I think here they are showing that they have leadership experience, and you can write a comment that it makes explicit why you made that decision and why in that statement you found that they're fulfilling that required. And then later you can also query both the data and your documentation, which gives you access to your decision process, and you can export and visualize this information. Very important, qualitative data analysis software does not do analysis for you. It's a workbench that you can use to be more reflective and to make implicit processes and decisions explicit. Examples for these types of software include NVivo, MAXQDA, Atlas.Ti. There's also a bunch of other programs out there. Jessie is going to show you how she does this process in hiring processes in NVivo. I use MAXQDA, but we're choosing to show NVivo because NVivo is available to everybody on campus through the UW software library. And so we thought it's a good start to show actually something with a tool that everybody has access to.
Okay, yeah. So now we're going to move into the part where I'm going to demo. I'm going to switch my screen sharing really quick, but as Christian mentioned, if you go to the UW campus software library, you can find that at it.wisc.edu/services/software. There's a number of titles that have been licensed for all on campus to use. NVivo is the software that's been chosen for qualitative data analysis. So it's available to you. Just a caveat, that doesn't mean there's a ton of support from Do It for this because they offer it. There's always a best effort if you're looking for support, but you can download it and install it and start using it on your own. So as noted, we have a link in the chat for a PDF version of this. So I do have step-by-step in there if you want to walk away with a little bit of a starter, but I'm going to switch my screen share here really quick so that I can show you all the software. So bear with me a second here. Let me do this desktop versus the whole. Okay, so looks like you can see my screen. Just need a confirmation. I see.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to actually try to zoom in here a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. So NVivo 2020 is the version that is available through Do It. So the first thing that you would want to do is you would want to make a project folder, let's say on your desktop, and you'd call it, search and screen number 5 or something. And you would, as you know, I assume this is probably pretty standard across all of HR. I've been in 2 different divisions now, and it seems the same, where all of the applications are made available to you with an applicant and a number. So they just come in numbered. They're usually blinded, but you usually have PDFs as your set of materials that you're reviewing. And so first, my recommendation would be put those all in a folder together, and the single digit ones rename with 2 digits, just so they file better. If you're kind of particular like me and I want to see things from 1 to whatever, if you don't renumber them 01, 02, 03 for 1 through 9, then those are going to file slightly differently in NVivo. So the first thing that you would just need to do is you would just import the files into the software so that there is the software is actually using them. So you're going to be using the software to read your PDFs as you read through your applicant materials. So you would just go to import PDFs. So here I have already imported 11 PDFs. I had ChatGPT help me make some cover letters that are not as extensive or as detailed as you would probably get in a regular search and screen, but it's a little bit of something. So I have 11 fake cover letters here. The next thing that you would do before you got started is you would prepare your codes. So in QDA software, what you're often doing is you're coding the data or adding data to the codes. In the case of serving on a search and screen, you would, by the time you're reviewing applications, you generally have your requirements and your preferreds sussed out by the committee. And so you know what you're looking for those requirements. And so you would create, I'll go over here to the create menu, and you would pre-create a code per each of your requirements. And so in the past, I've just labeled these as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You could give them little short names. It's, let's say you had one requirement that was about communication and one was about a specific years of experience about something, and you had something else that was like expertise in blah, blah, blah. You could name that whatever you want. So I'm going to create a new code. And trying to get this all on the screen together here.
We can see it on the screen.
Oh, you can see it fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So you could call your code the requirement. And then the nice thing too is that you could add the text from the actual requirement as your committee settled upon it here. So you could add the text in, and you could always have that as a reference. So at any point, if you wanted to look at a requirement, you can get info and you can see again here, this is the statement of the requirement. I also gave each code a color because I'll show you later how a color will help with that. I'm going to actually delete this code so that it's not interfering with the rest of my presentation. Lastly, the other place that I've been working in, there's a lot you could do with this software, but I'm trying to keep it fairly simple. So the other place is you would create a memo per applicant as you're reviewing them. And this is where that recording your decisions, making your decisions explicit comes in. So what does this look like? So let's say I'm reading this cover letter. I've got some text here. What I do is I go back to my codes and I make the codes the primary thing that I'm looking at. And I'm finding areas in here that I say, I think where they're saying this is where I'm seeing a connection to that requirement. So you can go through and you can find throughout their cover letter and throughout their resume places that say, oh, here, to me here, they're hitting that. And I'm seeing what feels to me like they're matching a requirement in this space. So as you're going through these documents, you can also select to show all the coding stripes. So as this is where the colors come in, so I could go through and see, and this is helpful. Let's say you've done your reviewing and then your committee doesn't meet for a week and a half. You've got documented and highlighted and easily accessible. This is where I said they met requirement 1. This is where they met requirement 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if you go through and as you read each one, you basically just code it where you're seeing them meet that requirement. In addition to that, you can start a memo so that as you're making decisions for each applicant, I'm actually going to start a new memo here for applicant 7 because I haven't done one for that applicant yet. And you don't need to add much to it here, but I can start recording my thoughts now. At this moment, what did I think about in terms of why did this person meet these requirements or didn't, you know? And this could be something where maybe this is something you already do and you do it just on the margins of an application or something like that, but you're basically creating a database of your decision making here. And so what's great about that is that you've got your notes that you're recording per applicant here. You can have those open and kind of looking at your cover letter here and where you've coded that the person meets it. The other thing I really like is that I'm going to close these two reader screens again. You can look at each of your files and you can see here, there's a column that says codes. So let's say you have 4 requirements, and as soon as each document meets like 4 has 4 codes on it, you know that that person has already met 4 requirements. So you're starting to also get a list of who's met the requirements and who hasn't. So those more important documents rise to the top. So that's an easy sorting. The last thing that I think is really beneficial is seeing how you've used a requirement across different documents. So if you go into your codes and you double click on one of them, so let's say I'm looking at requirement 1, and I go through here, and now I can see across all my applications, how have I been applying this code? So that I can see, gosh, I did allow, back in that first application, I did allow this something similar experience that seems similar to this one I'm reading now. It's that much easier to check how you've been thinking about people passing or meeting that requirement as you go through. So those are the basics. It's really quick. It's just files, codes, and memos, but it's a central location to keep it all. And I think that tagging is a really helpful element when going through this. I'm going to stop my demo there because I see we're at 2:42 in case there's a few questions folks want to ask about using such a tool.
So we have a question. Can you share these with others? So can you, I think I am assuming that that means that can you share them with other members of your search and screen team? Yes. Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. And
Yes,
combine the reviews or codes from across a search and screen team.
yes, you can. Depending on the software, it can take a couple of steps of importing that, but that is, yes, that's one of the advantages. You can basically overlay the coding decisions of several analysts and then actually compare them side by side and see where did which rater make decisions how and where do they differ. Some software also allows you to actually run intercoder reliability testing, which might be interesting for some larger screening processes, but for small projects, it probably is not necessary.
So I know Christian's experience with sharing is more with MAXQDA. With NVivo, I can't say that I have engaged in any kind of a shared usage of this tool. And I don't know if what that looks like does that mean there's a shared folder on a shared drive and that's where you store your documents in the file and then you're in, oh, Christian.
No, you would basically import the coding work onto an existing project. So if we have the same texts, then basically taking just the code assignments and they're going to get overlaid. Okay. And in some cases, you might have to have 2 different coding trees that one says Christian and the 5 requirements and one says Jesse and the 5 requirements so that you have basically 2 sets of attributes or coding decisions, and then you can compare those.
Great.
So Christian, the program that you use, is there a cost associated with that? Or is there a particular reason why you use that more than NVivo?
Yeah, there is a cost related. There is a cost connected to that. We use MAXQDA as a divisional data analysis tool. We have about 50 licenses across the division that were used for evaluation, research, and other projects. And we're using MAXQDA because it does, for the applications that we use, have advantages in terms of handling the features, ease of use, import of data, especially structured data from Qualtrics and spreadsheets. So the softwares are all comparable, but it's kind of like comparing 2 cars, right? So if you need an SUV, then you probably don't want to buy a tiny smart car. So we use MAXQDA because it fits our needs better in terms of evaluation and research.
And I use NVivo because I have access to it. And I've found that just even using just these basic, without digging into how you would query or kind of doing shared work, I've found that for this, and as Robert mentioned in the chat, you could use it for something like scoring RFPs, like any place where you have to go across a number of documents and find things where are the common themes? Where are they doing this and where are they not doing it? Using a software like that in many different applications is really helpful.
Thanks. All right, well, we are at time. So if anyone has any questions they want to follow up, with either Christian or Jesse. They have very kindly offered that you can email them to reach out if you have any questions about this. This has been incredibly useful. What a practical way to help wrangle the huge amount of applications that can come in for some job positions. So I want to thank all of you for coming to today's session. I want to thank Christian and Jesse, especially for presenting on this topic. And we have lots of great sessions coming up. So please feel free to take a short break and we'll see you again soon. So I will stop our recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.